Oh, absolutely. The idea of setting a novel in my region of Appalachia, writing about the kids, the orphans of the opioid epidemic, that came first. And I really fretted for 2 years about how to get into this really difficult story. So Charles Dickens came to me. He really did. I was happened to be spending here in the UK in Broadstairs, spending a night in Bleak House, and he came to visit. He said, "This is how you do it. You let the child tell the story." Yeah, in his study, which is all still set up in that house, or it was at that time. It was an inn. It was November, not high season in Broadstairs, so I had the place to myself. They said, do as you like. I was just drawn to that little study at the end of the hall, that desk, that view of the dark and stormy sea. I just felt the outrage of Dickens in that little room. And I had been thinking, really, for several years, nobody wants to hear about orphans and institutional poverty. I just felt, felt the spirit of Dickens saying, nobody wants to read about orphans and poverty. What's that? So I got it. He just gave me permission, and I started the book on his desk right there that night. The superpower of novels is that they put you, the reader, inside the brain and the eyes and the life of another human being. So that creates compassion. It creates empathy and breaks down the walls between ourselves and others, particularly between ourselves and people who are less lucky than us. If that can't change the world, you tell me what can. I grew up in Eastern Kentucky. Like many small town kids, I couldn't wait to get out of there, kick the little town dust off my shoes and go see the big world. And I did. I was scrappy and found ways to travel and find work wherever I went. So I lived in a lot of different places. I lived in Athens. I lived in Paris. I lived here in the UK. I lived in York, working on a medieval dig in the middle of the city. I lived out west in Tucson, Arizona for quite a long while. None of it felt like home. I always felt pulled back home, back to the mountains and the green hills and the creeks and the ferny banks of Appalachia. So when I finally did organize my life so that I could move back, it was almost as if nothing had changed except me. What changed is I knew I love that place. Those are my people. That is my culture, my language. It is the place I need to be fully myself and to be the writer I want to be. I had to do, it's set literally in the county, in the place where I live. So I knew a lot, but I didn't know everything. I had to learn a lot more about addiction from the inside, about how hard that life is. And I had to learn about the foster care system. And I'll tell you what shocked me the most, to learn that the foster care system is run as a for-profit business. Like almost everything else in America, it's run for profit. So these kids are product. How can that be a good thing? Charles Dickens knows how to tell a good story. That's it. And I've always loved Dickens. I love his characters. I love the engine of his plots. And so really tracking and laying one of my novels directly on top of his, chapter for chapter, was a masterclass in Dickens. And I learned a lot more about how that works. A lot of his secret tricks. One of them is short chapters that end with cliffhangers. It's almost like he was writing a miniseries. Well, he was in his time. Novels were presented as miniseries. People were waiting on the docks for the ship to deliver the next installment of the latest Dickens. So to write like that, like in little pieces that lead you into the next one, that's and also to have characters named things like Uriah Heep and Murdstone. And there's another thing he does with the cadence of his plots. They're known for coincidence, right? Like, oh, surprisingly, I met Estella, all these years later. Well, or Tommy Traddles, in the case of David Copperfield. These coincidences are perfectly timed so that just when you're ready to let go of a character, they bring you back. All these tricks are priceless. So I think every novelist really honestly wishes we could outsource our first drafts. That's what I did. And let me tell you this, if you're going to outsource your first draft, Dickens is your man.